We are in the center of Japan in a Saka Bay, where a giant Buddha keeps watch over the small island of Awaji. This is the setting for a garden like no other, called Away Yumebutai, which in Japanese means dream stage. It is the stuff of dreams. A garden formed of geometric shapes nestled between sky and sea on 28 hectares of land. In this surprising place, corridors, water features and flights of steps hug the mountain slopes. The harshness of the concrete, contrasting with the curves of the hillside, adds to the wonder. Is it a building? Is it a garden? Let's ask our Japanese green team. The garden's president, Idearu Fuji, planting consultant Ishihara Kinichiro, greenhouse manager Tomoko Sujimoto, head gardener Yokoyama Kuji, Buddhist monk Uchida Samyo, and the creator of this astonishing garden, Tadao Ando, one of Japan's most famous architects.
In my job, I like to create spaces that make people say, "I've never seen anything so beautiful." I don't know if I've achieved that, but I always try.
It is traditional in Japan for the garden to be inseparable from the architecture. Away Yumebutai falls within that tradition. Its landscape architecture is hard to classify according to Western criteria. The spaces intersect to form an esplanade 1 kilometre long. The site includes a conference centre, luxury hotel, an open-air theatre and one of Japan's largest greenhouses. In his constructions, Tadao Ando uses one of the heaviest materials there is, concrete, and yet the water, the light and the sky are really his raw materials.
The garden is situated on steep terrain, sloping down the hillside towards the sea. You can move around it horizontally, vertically, and even diagonally. In the middle of the garden, there is a maze. Modern architecture places great importance on the rational and functional side of things, and buildings must be user-friendly. I wanted to take this garden and these buildings to another level.
On this side of Awaji Island, where the height differentials are abrupt, Tadao Ando played with the topography of the terrain to adapt the garden to the slope. The hillside gives it momentum, while the concrete gives it an almost cosmic appearance. The use of staircases is one of the strongest features of the garden.
To start with, when you draw it on paper, it looks simple. But in reality, it's far more complicated because you need to think about people moving about in it. A garden like this is very hard to achieve, which is why there is no other garden like it. When I submitted the plans, I was told that it wasn't feasible, that this garden was impossible to achieve.
Minimalism, geometry, concrete. All the trademarks of Tadao Ando's art can be found in this architectural masterpiece with its unsettling optical tricks. The architect has made his mark on the place and created buildings which act as a gateway between land and sky, putting visitors in touch with nature.
There used to be a mountain where Yumebutai is today, but it was razed to the ground. The identity of the place was lost.
Mount Nada used to stand here, rising to about 1,600 metres above sea level. The earth and sand were dug up to build the artificial island that houses Kansai International Airport on the other side of Saka Bay. It was the world's biggest building site at the time. After 2 years of intense exploitation, this quarry became barren land without even a single blade of grass growing on it. Tadao Ando insisted on replanting the area long before the garden was constructed.
The idea was to give the first 5 years to the trees. I wanted these 30-centimetre trees to be 5 meters tall by the time the work was complete.
Ishihara Kinichiro was brought in to advise on planting when work on the garden began.
The philosophy behind Tadao Ando's architecture is for people to live in harmony with nature. His vision was for a forest to be planted on this barren land, to grow up around the buildings he designed, and we went to great lengths to achieve that. The hardest part was planting on a slope. We selected about 10 plants. The plants compete with one another, and we wanted to take advantage of that. The Japanese name for this plant is ubamagashi. Today, it has become the dominant species in this forest. It accounts for almost 80% of the vegetation. The trees have grown well here because they're suited to these conditions. It is a species which produces a lot of acorns, which is good for reproduction.
Idiara Fuji is the president of Away Yumebutai. He knows the site inside out, but he still manages to get lost in these vast spaces.
It is a recurring concept in Tadao Ando's architecture. He plays with time and space, enriching people's experience of a place. You can literally get lost in this garden, as if you were a child again. It is as if Tadao Ando was playing a practical joke on us.
For a place to become a maze, you have to create a maze in the hearts of the people who come here. In modern-day society, we have no doubts about the paths we take. But in Yumebutai, the steps visitors take lead them towards the unexpected. That is the maze I wanted to create.
One of the characteristics of Tadao Ando's style is the combination of curves and straight lines. What intrigues me is this sort of cut-off bridge in the middle. I don't understand what it means, but it's very typical of Tadao Ando's world. In any case, it amuses me. I get a lot of pleasure out of being here.
In Japan, cherry trees are treasured to such an extent that their blossom in spring is celebrated by a festival called Hanami, which literally means, look at the flowers. The Japanese have been nurturing this passion since the 18th century, creating hybrids that have resulted in hundreds of varieties of cherry tree.
There are 300 varieties of cherry tree in this park. We have a notebook for each variety so that we can look after it properly. But the most popular variety is the Yoshino cherry tree. This is the cherry tree you most often see in Japan. It's the emblem of Japan. This variety of tree flowers before coming into leaf. That is why people like it. Cherry trees need a cold spell in order to blossom. It has to be cold for the tree to produce any flowers. For the Hanami festival, the Japanese get together with family and friends. And they eat and drink under the cherry trees to celebrate the arrival of spring. It's part of their culture.
On the other side of the garden, just behind the planted roof of the forum, The tea house is hidden in the middle of a cylindrical maze surrounded by clear water and pebbles. The plants aren't the only important elements in the art of the Japanese garden. In this cramped country where space is in short supply, the Japanese have developed a particular aesthetic where empty spaces are valued. These spaces are called ma, meaning interval, duration or distance, not that which separates, but that which unites. The Sky Garden is an in-between space without any real function. Tadao Ando is interested in extolling the spirituality of places.
I realized when I started my career that architecture is something you learn by looking at other architectural works. When I go to France, I look at the Château de Versailles and also the Louvre. These are dynamic buildings, governed by symmetry. Another garden which has inspired me greatly is that of Hadrian's Villa in Rome. I'm particularly fond of that garden. I've been there several times. I've discovered there is a world that is profoundly different to Japanese architecture. It is very powerful architecture, which makes its presence felt.
The two levels of the mountain and the sea are linked by a succession of fountains and inner courtyards. It is a poetic invitation to take a stroll.
In the last century, we thought humans could do everything on their own. But we need earth, sea, and air. We cannot live without those three elements. I would like this garden to heighten visitors' awareness of that need. I'm constantly asking myself these questions. How can I connect people with nature? How can I represent the West and Japan? How can I create a new universe? These are fundamental questions in the current climate, in a world where we are destroying nature. I strive to make people aware of the importance of nature by making them reflect on their environment. If we can manage to heighten enough people's awareness, that will allow us to continue to live on this planet.
The first structure, designed by Tadao Ando on Awaji Island, is situated nearby in a Buddhist temple. Its mirror of water, dotted with water lilies, is dedicated to the liquid element. It is aptly named the Temple of Water.
You see this raw concrete? That's Tadao Ando's signature style. This concrete wall is the equivalent of the portico in Buddhist temples, or the torii in Shinto shrines. It separates the world in which we live from the world of the Buddha.
特殊才能差言語力銀行執着有分子温素暗邪理終実自信上有形式自現性が既得一世をし最永楽意修陸大王殺生特養上来主銀行医
The temple and the garden go hand in hand. Yumebutai Garden and Honpokuji Temple are as one. I wanted both of them to be designed in a Japanese style, where the buildings are hidden and not visible.
Water is very important in this country that is so influenced by Shinto beliefs. In Shintoism, water is associated with change, renewal and purification. At Awaji Yumebutai, there is water linking all the spaces.
On Awaji Island, there aren't many natural sources of water, so we had to conserve that element. We invented a system which catches rainwater in storage pipes. It's a closed circuit, so the water is recycled. That way, the rainwater remains in the garden and doesn't flow out to sea. Water is obviously important from a visual perspective, but also from a sound perspective. No one ever pays attention to that, but it's very important. I made sure the sound of the water created a harmony in the garden.
From beneath the waterfall, the sound of running water echoes in the cave. This is a cooling refuge which gives visitors a feeling of solitude and peace. On the lowest part of the site, they find the ponds and fountains of the Shell Esplanade.
Embedded in this fountain are 1 million scallop shells. We were sent 3 million from Hokkaido. We selected the ones with the prettiest shapes and placed them in the fountain. Having these shells here creates a special effect on the water running over them.
Tonight, the bells of the seaside chapel toll to remind us that Awaji Yumebutai Garden is linked to one of the worst catastrophes in the history of Japan. On 17th of January 1995, a deafening roar shook the city of Kobe, not far from this garden. Within seconds, the metropolis had collapsed. The consequences of this earthquake were terrible, with over 6,400 victims. At Awaji Yumebutai, work stopped and the project was put on hold. How could they recover from this natural disaster which had rocked the nation? Tadao Ando came up with the idea of a garden turned towards Kobe, which would serve as a monument to the victims. Thus, Hyakudan-en was born, or the garden with 100 steps.
The garden with 100 steps is a monument dedicated to the dead. It's a flower bed for those who lost their lives. The number 100 was chosen because it represents infinity.
Plants and flowers have the power to uplift people.
For me, the fact that this garden is a spiritual place is just as important as its beauty. The garden with 100 steps exists to remind us to live in harmony. I think it's a garden created to heighten awareness, something that is increasingly rare in Japan today, where people think only of economic growth.
In the north of the garden, Kaseki No Hoshi is a greenhouse covering 6,700 square metres and composed of 2 intersecting buildings. Immersed in plants, water, light and art, visitors are stimulated by the lushness and profusion of nature growing under this glass roof. Every year, Tomoko Sujimoto designs a special scenography to celebrate the arrival of spring.
To show off this 20-metre-high greenhouse designed by Tadao Ando, I have had to invent some dynamic things. This garden represents flower beds, terraced rice fields and the swell of the sea around Awaji Island in the moonlight. At least, that's how I saw it. Gardens are very important to the Japanese because the deities live in nature. It is a place for encountering and communing with the deities.
Once upon a time in Japan, there was an almost symbiotic relationship between people and plants, but that link has gradually eroded over time. The idea behind this greenhouse is to revive it by displaying plants that symbolise Japanese culture. Omotos are plants from ancient times, which are thought to bring good luck. The Japanese grow them in pots.
This plant is called omoto. It is a species traditionally grown by the Japanese. It is a Rhodea japonica. In the 16th century, a samurai gave this plant to another samurai who had to leave his palace. Later, that samurai's family, Tokugawa, experienced great prosperity. That started a tradition for giving this plant to people who are moving house. They are very expensive plants, like bonsais. They are priceless. Collectors will pay up to 16,000 euros for them. Certain elements determine the value of an omoto and are particularly sought after. The first thing is the colour and the patterns on the leaves. Then there is the shape. Look at this one. The surface of the leaves have a slightly raised pattern called jimonji. That adds real value to the plant. The Japanese think there is a spiritual value in putting your all into everything you do. For the Japanese, taking care of something means showing maximum commitment.
The name Yumebutai means big dream. There are 2 types of dreams. Dreams which have no shape or form, and dreams which we keep in our hearts. I wanted to show both types of dream in this garden. And at the same time, I wanted it to be a place where people understand the importance of nature. My aim was to make visitors more aware of their natural environment. The garden's a perfect place for that. I wanted to do my bit as an architect.
The landscape architecture created by Tadao Ando at Awaji Yumebutai is unclassifiable and unique. Marked by a major natural disaster, its construction symbolises both the turning point in his work and the passage from the 20th to the 21st century, when sustainable development has become a constant preoccupation. By trying to repair the damage caused to the mountain, the Awaji Yumebutai Garden celebrates the importance of nature, opening up a luminous vista between sky, earth and sea.
What I want to say is that the eternal resides in the garden, not in the architecture. The heart of the site is the garden, not the architecture. In 10 years' time, all the buildings on the site will be hidden by the forest. And within the garden, the people, the trees, the water, and the sea will be one. That is the garden I wanted to create.